Okay, it's Monday. Another week flies by, really, for most of us, I think. And it's 3 o'clock, which must mean it's Chen time. So welcome to this week's podcast. I'll just get myself sorted out at this end and check that I'm actually streaming live, which is always part of the fun thing to do. Okay, the red light's on, so that looks good. We're live. Okay, that's all good. So welcome to this week's podcast. Obviously, as people get joined in, we will obviously say hello, have a chat. As you can see, new banner, which is all good. So we've got a new picture to look at. Yep, thank you, Tesla. So it was nice to know someone's actually there listening, because otherwise we do spend quite a lot of time talking to ourselves, which I'm quite happy to do, of course. But it's always nice if someone's actually listening to what you are saying. So thanks for joining, which is cool. I'm sure Jane from downstairs and Vanessa will pop on at some point as well, because they're the roadies, so to speak. Keep us in check, make sure that we're on time, which is always fun. So I think this week, really, every week we try and do a different topic. Obviously, that topic kind of gets prompted by either myself, Jane, generally, or obviously we talk to Chen. Chen's got a million different ideas on things he'd like to talk about. So we try and find something that's interesting, something that's kind of topical from our perspective, I guess, really, in terms of the things that people are asking, the things that people are emailing in to find out questions about, answers about. So this week we're going to talk about entity clearing. Entities in themselves, what are entities? Why do they need clearing? Then, of course, we'll kind of hop over onto attachments. So again, from a spiritual perspective, what is an attachment? Where do they come from? And what do they do really to our energies? And then we're going to get Chen to talk about why some people find it more difficult to clear and remove attachments. So certainly from our perspective, just going to say hi to 9320 and Geraldine. Good to see you, Geraldine. And Jane from downstairs has appeared, of course. So nice to have everyone here. So again, what these attachments are, where they come from. And we get quite a lot of questions on a weekly basis, really. When I say we, that's the royal we, because Jane fields the email, and that's kind of her role, really, from our perspective. So she's dealing with you guys in terms of clients behind the scenes, answering questions. So she gets a lot of questions about why some people, we can do a clearing, entities are removed, intrusive thoughts, that type of stuff disappear really quickly. But for other people, it's not so easy. So some people need more sessions, basically. And of course, some people need to do some things themselves. So there is a bit of self-help required for some people. And it was one of the kind of questions that Jane and I were talking about earlier. And Jane said, I wonder why it is that Chen can clear and remove some of these entities very easily and quickly, but other ones can be a bit more tricky. So it would be interesting to talk about why they're more tricky, why they need to be identified, what that kind of reciprocal process is to come back after another session to find and clear those entities and remove them. So it's quite a good topic, I think, from our perspective, because again, it comes up quite often. And from our perspective, obviously, this is kind of what we do. So we obviously work in that sort of, I think, in the trenches is the way that Chen describes it, really. So we're kind of in the Chen trenches, sort of nose to nose with negative things generally. And obviously working on behalf of clients to clear those negative things, find where they come from, what they are. And there's a whole list of things that obviously we work through from a spiritual clearing perspective. And I guess from my perspective as well, there's two types of different work that we do. So part of my kind of upbringing spiritually really was kind of psychic surgery. So the work that we did was termed and called psychic surgery. So the general concept being surgery on the etheric field. So the days of us kind of using scalpels and that kind of things are over. We can't do things like that on physical body. So instead of that, of course, Chen's clearing the etheric field. So he's performing spiritual surgery on a client's etheric field. And the things that they find in that etheric field from a kind of negative perspective are then the things that are being identified, cleared and removed. And of course, there are different types of things that we could talk about inside people's etheric fields. So that's kind of one side of what we do, really. And then that kind of dovetailed into SRT, so spirit release therapy. I spent a long time, 10 years really, working with Dr. Palmer. Rest in peace. Obviously, he's passed back in 2021. But him and I spent 10 years working on SRT therapy, developing a protocol. And that protocol was, again, similar to psychic surgery, to look inside someone's etheric field, find the things that are causing problems, really, and to identify them initially, and then, of course, to clear and remove them. So again, that was a kind of long process to do those things. It wasn't really a 5-minute task at all. So the way that I perform appointments, the way that I work is obviously it's kind of a mesh, I guess, of psychic surgery that we kind of started to do years ago. And then, of course, SRT. So those two things kind of amalgamate together in the way that we work. Mainly, of course, because we're working with a guide, Chen, my guide, and obviously that's kind of the way that he works from that perspective. So hi to Mary and Vanessa. I thought you'd probably join Nessie. It's good to see you. You might learn something today. Perhaps you can teach me something, actually, which would be interesting. So if you guys have got questions or anything you want to pop in the chat, feel free until Chen comes in. Of course, at that point, I tend to have my eyes closed. So even though he probably knows what you're asking, obviously the questions are kind of up for when I'm here, really, before we hand over to Chen. So from my perspective, let's just talk about people presenting with problems. So the majority of people, I guess, that we see, if we were to look at the kind of stats and look at the data set, which we do have a very big data set, because obviously, effectively, we've been doing this for sort of well over 15 years now. So the data set's pretty huge in terms of thousands and thousands of people. And we're starting to collect data on clients and what they perceive to happen, how they feel, what they're presenting with. So I guess from our perspective, that the biggest presenting problems really would be sort of anxiety, depression, kind of top of the list, as well as intrusive thoughts, intrusive ideas. And then we're talking about things like schizophrenia is on the kind of end really, but most people have this kind of uneasy feeling inside themselves, and they kind of know that they've got something in their field, and that something in their field is causing them problems generally. So we're kind of working from that perspective. So again, people that are feeling uneasy, anxious, depressed, anger comes up an awful lot. Again, especially for kind of husbands and for males, lots of men have attachments, and those attachments drive anger type issues and things really. So again, that's something else that we see quite a lot of from a presenting problem really. So again, there's a whole myriad of reasons why people can be anxious, they can be depressed, they can be having intrusive thoughts, and they can be angry. So we kind of put all of the normal things to one side, and we'll just look and work through the spiritual aspects that obviously we're going to talk about. So if you're having odd thoughts, intrusive thoughts, if you're feeling angry, if things are going wrong in your life, continually going wrong, so everything breaks down, white goods are continually breaking down, dishwashers, washing machines, the cars breaking down, things are kind of happening around you, most people notice that things seem to be going wrong in their life. And when they notice that, it becomes an observation to start with, and then people think about things like, have I been cursed? Is there something attached to me that's causing these problems? And of course, this is kind of where we come in terms of what we do really. So we look at the etheric field. Chen will present basically etheric field to me from a psychic perspective, and he'll tell me what they find attached to someone in that energetic field. And we're just looking for negative things. So in that field, there'll be a whole host of things. There'll be stagnant, stale energy. Lots of people have been through traumas, sort of pain, divorces, bad relationships, abuse. There's a whole kind of list of things that kind of get baked into your etheric field. And what the spirit guides, Chen and his team, do is come in, extract that etheric field, look for anything that's not your vibration, because we all have our own vibratory frequency. So Chen and the team are looking for a vibration that's not your own frequency, and that then probably is a negative frequency, and that's what they're looking to clear and remove, basically. So when we start to think about that, if we put to one side the normal things that we can think about, people that have been through traumas and pain, obviously have a lot of stale, stagnant energy set in their field. It's pretty easy to clear and remove from a guide perspective. But people that have got attachments, and the way that we see attachments generally are two types of attachments. So we see spirit attachments, so humans, basically people like us that have died, been living on the planet, have died and their spirit hasn't moved across to the spiritual frequency that we could call heaven, we can call it spirit, we can call it home, all sorts of terminologies depending upon your particular cultures, religions, that type of thing. But if spirit hasn't moved across, they can attach to you. And then, of course, we also have entities. So these are non-human entities, basically, that don't look like us. They've never been human. They've never had a human life. They come from a different place, generally different planetary star system. And again, there's a whole host of different types of entities. So most people thinking of kind of reptilians and greys and archons, and there's a whole list of them that we all kind of can Google and find out about effectively. But that's kind of that aspect. So these different entities obviously, when they attach to people, then they start to control people in different ways. So these entities that we're talking about, and the ones that we work on and clear, vibrate at a very low frequency. So if our vibration's quite high, they're vibrating at this really low frequency down below us. And of course, for them to assimilate our energy into themselves, they need to bring our vibratory frequency down. And the way they do that is they attach to our etheric field. They start to suck our energy, so we start to feel fatigued, tired, drained, generally sleep problems, probably sleep paralysis, nightmares, those sorts of things. And people will notice they start to have recurring nightmares. And lots of people are terrified to go to sleep when you have entity attachments, because they're driving that kind of fear-based emotional feeling. So as we move into a state of fear or anger, our vibration comes down. So as that vibration comes down, they try to bring it down as far as they can. And then, of course, they assimilate our energy into their field. So if you like, obviously these types of entities we're talking about don't have a human body. They don't have a physical body. They exist in a different frequency, but they're attaching to our etheric field that's also in a different frequency that we don't see physically with our eyes, but we know that we've got one. And effectively, they're then going to put hooks into us and start to feed off our energy. And of course, the more negative you become, the more problems you become, the more problems you have in your life, really, I guess, to that aspect, then, of course, the more they assimilate that energy into themselves. And that's what they're kind of looking to do, is to connect not just to one person. So an entity can be connected to everybody in a family. So if someone has an entity connected, for whatever reason, they've been through pain, abuse, trauma, PTSD, all sorts of things, then that entity will connect firstly to the core person and will start to drain their energy, and then start to create arguments in the home, start to create chaos, basically. That person will notice that their life starts to become more chaotic. Things start to go wrong. People start to argue with them at work. People argue with them during the day. So they start to have a whole load of problems. And what they notice is that their life starts to take a big downhill slide. And of course, that impacts the other people generally then in their families. So if it's a husband, the wife will start to find that she's in lots of arguments with the husband. There's lots of unharmonic energy in the house. Children start to get involved and start to become angry. And, you know, we all know what it's like if you live in a house of chaos, really. Everything seems to be going wrong. No one's very happy. Everyone's blaming each other. There's lots of anger and arguments and negativity. And of course, that feeds these entities. So they kind of sit in the middle, connecting to each person, just sucking that energy. So that's kind of how they work effectively from that perspective. So that's what an entity would do. And of course, most entities are very negative. So once they've connected to someone, not only are they kind of sucking their energy from that perspective, their appetite is big. So they'll be looking for that person to continually dropping down and down and down in their own frequency. So become more angry, more rage. Then they'll start to have intrusive thoughts. So these entities will start to put thoughts in that person's mind, very negative thoughts to do negative things. Again, lots of anger, those types of things. So these entities work in that way, basically. And then, of course, as things get worse, that person starts to hear voices, generally can't sleep. So sleep's being impacted, and their life is obviously moving downhill pretty quickly. And then some of them will become schizophrenic. So they'll be hearing voices all of the time. And the way that these entities tend to work is, even though they can put thoughts in our mind, the way they tend to work is they'll find other spiritual attachments. So people that have been alive like us, that are dead, haven't moved over to spirit. They find those spiritual energies and they push them into the field. It's almost like when we've got kind of like a field of sheep, really. You've got a sheepdog that turns up and basically herds the sheep into the field and kind of puts them in a circle. And the kind of sheepdog runs around the outside and just keeps those sheep in that space. So entities do the same. They'll find some other spiritual energies, people like us, basically, move them into that and connect them into that person's etheric field, and that person's hearing multiple voices now. So these spirits that haven't moved on are obviously talking telepathically to that person, so they can hear them, they can have conversations. We're all aware when we've sat on public transport buses and things, and we see people talking to themselves, or apparently talking to themselves, but they're probably talking to other spirits that are around them that they can hear. And obviously we label that as schizophrenia. in the kind of Western medical perspective. But effectively, that person's just telepathic. They're talking to spirit. They can hear spirit. Spirits are talking to them. But of course, it drives them demented because those spiritual entities continue to talk all of the time. So that person's not sleeping, awake all the time. And obviously their life just gets worse and worse and worse. And the entity is then feeding on all of that negative energy, as well as controlling the spirits that are kind of attached to that person's field. So this is where people then book an appointment and think, okay, how do I deal with this? Generally go through some normal process, go and see a medical doctor, go down that type of process. But if they look at the spiritual reasons that will be happening, from our perspective, it's clearly a spiritual problem. Not to say that all degrees of schizophrenia, psychosis and things are spiritual problems, but certainly there's a percentage of them that are spiritual problems and they can be resolved spiritually. So this is where someone will book an appointment with people like ourselves, some spiritual clearers or cleansing people or psychic surgeons, to come in, look at that field, find what's attached in terms of how many entities, how many spirits are impregnated into that person's auric field. And then the spirit guide's job in the way that we work, so for me, Chen, his job would be to basically remove and disconnect those spirits. And when he removes and clears them out of that person's field, then of course the voices stop because their aspect of telepathy is turned off. So they've no longer got attachments or entities in their field. They don't have to listen to them. And of course it goes quiet. And we can see this, obviously, Dr. Palmer and myself documented this in a video series that you can see on our YouTube channel, the Hearing Voices series, where we actually worked on a soldier that had been hearing voices for near on 20 years after he came back from war. And in literally, the video series is probably half a day, I guess, but the actual time it took us to remove and disconnect the attachments was probably 10 to 15 minutes. Obviously, we were recording it for a video, and Terry wanted to document the process, so the video is a bit longer, but the actual time was very short, because it is a case of bringing the spirit guide in to do the clearing and removing. And I guess the topic here is, why is it then that for some people it doesn't work, or it takes multiple times to work? So for some people, they can book an appointment, the guides come in, find these energies, clear and remove them. Happy days, person feels much better. Anxiety disappears, depression disappears, intrusive thoughts disappear, psychosis disappears. Obviously, their life generally gets better very quickly, and most people report they wake up in the morning feeling the best they've felt for a long, long time, because of course their field is clear. And I guess this is the question for Chen, really. This kind of opens it up now to why is it that sometimes this is quite difficult to do, and yet other times it's very easy. So I probably know some of the answers, to be fair, because obviously we've been doing this a long time. But for you, the audience that are listening, and our people on the podcast, we're going to get Chen in so you can actually hear it straight from the horse's mouth, really, in terms of what he needs to do and how he actually does that. So without further ado, taking the watch off, which is good, we'll get Chen in and we'll go from there. I'll just move the microphone to here, which is good. Okay, I need to set the alarm, otherwise I'll still be here in about 4 hours' time, probably. So let's just do that a second. Timer. Okay, so Chen's on the clock, so to speak. Right, okay, so we'll pass over to Chen. I have set the timer, James from downstairs. Whether he'll hear it, of course, and whether he'll turn it off is yet to be seen, but the timer is actually on, so you might have to come and bang the door and tell him off if he goes over. Okay, let's hand over to Chen. Good day to you all. It's my pleasure again to be with you here on this weekly podcast. Something I'm thoroughly enjoying, the ability to be able to converse with the audience in a one-to-one configuration. So rather than obviously working through a medium such as Andrew, which of course is very good and lovely from that perspective, it's very nice for myself to be able to take over this physical body and to be able to work in this trance manner whereby my energy effectively takes control of the host's physical body, in this case young Andrew, and then of course I can animate the physical body. I can speak, I can move everything. And we've been doing this for quite a long time now, so as you can see, it's quite quick to do this. Back in the day, it would take Andrew probably an hour or so to get these vibrations to a point that I was actually able to come in and take over. And then, of course, it would take me some time to bring my vibration down to basically control and animate the physical body. But these days, it's very quick. It's only a matter of seconds, and we can basically swap places, rather like a car that the driver jumps out and then another driver jumps in. So the topic of conversation today, as young Andrew has very well and quite clearly detailed and narrated for us, is we're talking about entity attachments. And we've covered why that happens and how it happens, really. So let's have my perspective. So obviously my vibrational frequency isn't in your physical realm per se. I'm a spiritual entity, and my spiritual vibration is well outside of the frequency that you exist in, because of course you're human beings. Well, hopefully you're human beings. Most of you should be, really, that are listening to this particular podcast. So you're human beings, you have a physical body. Inside that physical body, you have a spiritual vibrational frequency that is your spirit. And this is called spirit. And we all know the word spirit generally means a spiritual intelligence that's basically aligned with and locked inside the physicality, generally until death. So when you're born, that spiritual intelligence is inserted in the womb into the growing fetus, and then of course upon death that spiritual intelligence disconnects from the carbon-based physical body and obviously returns back to its vibratory frequency, which of course is spirit as such. So we obviously have people that die that don't move back to spirit, and their vibratory essence, or their conscious awareness, if you like, is left on the earth plane. We call these people earthbounds. So we have spiritual intelligence that are walking around next to you in the supermarket. You can't see them from a physical perspective, but they're in and around your field. And of course, they're effectively not really collaborating with you from a physical perspective, but they're certainly in your space. And when we talk about things like poltergeists and spiritual entities that cause problems, if they have enough energy, they're able to animate physical things. They can open doors, they can move things. And this is what you see on all of your Hollywood films and such like, where you have poltergeist type activity. So that would be a spiritual entity or energy that's able to move things in your physical space. So when I come along and we're performing a clearing, myself and my team, the first thing we do is obviously connect to the client. So we don't generally need names. We no longer need hair or body parts to be sent through the post. Basically, we connect to the vibratory frequency of the person that booked the appointment. So if you book the appointment, we can find your frequency. If you're booking for your mother or father, we obviously can find their frequency from you. So we basically immediately lock on to the vibratory frequency of the person that we're working on. And we can call those the client or the recipient of the work, essentially. So once we've locked on to the client or the recipient, the first thing we do then is we actually look at what vibratory frequency they have. So, and of course, generally it's quite low, because generally they're booking a clearing because they have problems. So they're manifesting these types of issues that young Andrew catalogued earlier, things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, some type of abuse, traumas. There's a whole list of things, of course, that can be there. But that recipient or client has those problems. So we're looking for the frequency. So we first find their core frequency of vibration. So this is the core part of them, and that will have a particular vibratory frequency, generally depending upon the lives they've lived, the past lives they've lived. Everyone has their own unique frequency. We tend to call this a 16-digit number, but there are different types of wording around it. But effectively, each of you have your own frequency. So once we find that frequency in your field, we know that is the client, that's the recipient. And then we scan the etheric field for all of the other frequencies that are embedded in that etheric field that are not the core frequency. And then therefore we know that all of those other frequencies, in our perspective, would be negative. Because of course, for you to be a sovereign individual, you would only have your core frequency of vibration. So if you visualize yourself inside a big protected bubble of light, if you're sat inside there, happy and contented, and you're a sovereign individual, only one frequency would be inside that bubble, which is your core frequency. And this would be what we term sovereignty. So when we look inside that bubble, if we see lots of other frequencies, apart from the core frequency, we know that these are generally negative frequencies that you've picked up over time. And of course, we're looking for conscious awareness. So we're looking for spiritual attachments or entities. So those two things to start with. So when we find a spiritual attachment, my team will connect. We will have a conversation, generally, why they are there. Generally, the answer, of course, is that they've been pushed into the etheric field by these entities that obviously control in the way that they do. So the first thing we do is release that spiritual conscious awareness, that spiritual intelligence. We take them home. We take them back to their spiritual home, back to heaven. Again, different wordings, but the same thing effectively. So they're moved out of the client or recipient's field. That leaves us then with an entity, or maybe many entities. Most people don't have too many from our perspective. Entities tend to control, and they don't really work in packs particularly. So it's generally one or two, or maybe a few more entities together. But generally, I would say on average, it's one entity that will be actually controlling someone from that perspective. So again, we lock onto the entity's frequency, we make contact from a telepathic perspective, and we have a conversation in the same way that you would do in your physical space. And we advise the entity that we've been invoked by the client, and of course by the higher self of the client, to perform a spiritual clearing. And that means the entity is being disconnected and cleared from the field of the client and recipient. So at this time, many entities, especially the ones that don't come with much energy and they're not particularly nasty, if you like, will happily put their hands up and they will basically detach themselves. So we will give them, in your time anyway, a few moments to release themselves from the client or the recipient's field, and we will then escort them into a completely different vibratory dimension that isn't connected to planet Earth at all. So effectively move them off planet. You could think in the way that you see things. Everything is frequency based, everything is vibratory. So we just move them off. So if you just visualize them being taken off to a different planet, we could say Mars or somewhere, just for the conversation. So they're taken off planet. They're not able to return. Their frequency is locked out of this planet, so they're completely removed, and therefore they can't come back and reconnect to the client or recipient. So most of the time this is the case. We then obviously go through a whole list of other frequencies of vibration that are negative in the client and recipient's field and continue to clear and remove curses. We're looking for stagnant energy, stale energy. There's a whole host of things. Some things go back to past lives, which we obviously can find too, but without going through the full conversation, this would be more aligned with spirit release therapy work that, of course, the Spirit Release Academy are doing. So we're just talking about entities and attachments and why they don't leave. So if we have an entity that won't leave, generally it's because they're more powerful. They've been around for longer. They're very well hooked into the client's field. And of course, the way they hook in is they actually attach to the base of the spine. They attach to the heart chakra. They attach to many of the lymphatic systems in the client's field. And this is why people have heart palpitations. People hear different words when you speak to someone that's schizophrenic. They're not hearing what you say. That wording and that vocabulary is being distorted and changed by the entity effectively. And of course, then that person speaks to you, the client or recipient, and half the time they don't know what they're saying because, again, the wording is being changed by the entity to be more negative, more aggressive, and there's a lot of anger generally. So people that are schizophrenic or have intrusive thoughts and voices will pretend to be very angry and negative, but of course they're being controlled by these entities behind the scenes. So we will then start to negotiate with the entity that the entity has to leave. The higher self has invoked us. We're working with universal law that affects planet Earth, and universal law states that when a person elects to have an energy cleared and removed, that should happen. And of course, we effectively are the spiritual police force to a certain degree. So our job is to come in and basically hold up the sign that says we've been invoked, we have power, we have the consent of the recipient and the client to remove and detach the entities that are connected. Now, of course, at this time, some entities continue not to play ball, and they basically tie themselves much deeper into the etheric field. So if you can imagine an entity that is happy to leave pulls its energy out and just effectively walks away. So the client's field is left very clear. If you imagine an entity that's almost like some type of burrowing insect, it burrows itself more deeper into the field. And of course, it's attaching to all of the key points. So they're attaching to the throat, the stem of the spine, the heart chakra, the solar plexus chakra, and lots of other places. So then we have to basically go in and start to find those strands, those energetic strands that have been connected to all of those places, and start to remove and clear each one. And of course, this can be quite a time-consuming process from our perspective. And of course, it's not particularly easy. So if you think of an octopus with lots and lots of legs, and all of those legs are connected in around the heart chakra, they're connected to the lower chakras, they're connected into the base of the spine, they're generally connected into the throat chakra, also the ears. So there's a whole host of places that we need to find each individual connection, clear and remove it. And of course, this can take some time. And some of these entities, of course, are quite stubborn because they've been around a long time. So whilst we're working through trying to do that, there's obviously a time lapse happening. From your perspective, from our perspective, of course, we continue to work. But from your perspective, this may take a day, 2 days, 3 days after the appointment time. The work is still continuing. So, of course, the client, the physical person, the physical client or recipient may notice they don't feel particularly better, or they're having pains in different parts of their bodies, or they still do have this one elective, intrusive thought. And, of course, we say generally, I think, young Andrew says on the website now, that things can take up to about 5 days, because of course all of that energy has to be cleared and removed from the field, disconnected. Not that that takes 5 days in your timeline, but once we've pulled apart the etheric field and we've removed everything, the etheric field is left very chaotic with holes, all sorts of perforations, and then we need that person to start to build back their own protection. And again, there's a timeline where these things happen. So in that timeline, some people don't feel better. Some people, of course, may feel worse because all of their energetic system has been completely pulled apart and played with and disconnected. And lots of these attachments have the ability to cause immense pain too, of course, because they're connected into the whole nervous system of the physical person. So entities can cause pain because, of course, if they do something in the etheric, then that will mirror itself back to the physical body and you will feel pain. And young Andrew can tell you he's had many psychic attacks over the years when we were understanding how these things work and the way that we wanted to work with of course, young Terence. And psychic attack is very painful. People have pains in their forehead. People have intense migraines. People can have pain in their heart that feels like a heart attack. So there's a lot of nasty things that can happen from a spiritual protection perspective when entities are attacking you, of course. So, and that's why, from our perspective, if you have what we might consider to be like a type 1 gargoyle type entity attached to your field, they're very easy to remove and very quick. We see them as fleas almost. They're on the field, they're connected to you, they whisper into your ear, they cause intrusive thoughts, they use telepathy, they will drain your energy, of course, but they're not particularly difficult from our perspective to clear. But if we look at what we would type as a type 2, which you would see as some sort of demonic entity that your religions would talk about, then these can be more difficult, but they can generally be negotiated with from our perspective. And of course, we generally come with quite a big team. So one type 2 negative entity connected to a client, when they see myself and the team turn up, they realize that the game is up. It's just how long they take to elect to leave. But type 3 entities, in the way that we talk about them again from the work that young Andrew and Terence did, and of course myself, the way that we identified type 3 was extraterrestrial, so ET entities that have never been human, entities that are here on planet Earth. They're not really demonic and they don't fit into the gargoyle category. So these types of entities, and there are lots and lots of different types, they have a much lower vibration, they're much more negative, and they're more difficult to deal with from our perspective. So we could consider things or entities such like the reptilian race that we talk about as those sorts of things. There are other hybrids of that race too. And of course, these can be quite difficult for us to clear and remove. And there's a timeline that takes. So sometimes it may take 2 or 3 different sessions, because we will remove most of the connections from the recipient and client. And then, of course, there can be things that are left in the field to cause problems. And we generally leave them there for a short time to see if they will extract themselves. So entities will extract all of their energy eventually. Some of them leave themselves connected. So it might be that the client needs to book another session, come back for a review, depending on how they feel. And then we as a team go back in and we find these energetic connections that have been left in place. And then we start to clear and remove those. And again, this can be quite a laborious process. It takes time. We have to find every single frequency of vibration that's not the core client or recipient and remove and extract it from the field. So you can imagine it can be quite difficult and it takes time. And this, of course, is why spirit guides, certainly your spirit guides, can struggle. So when we talk about everything in the world of spirit and spirituality being quite simple, we just ask the guides to do things, or we invoke the angelic realm to come in and do things. It's not quite as simple as that in practice. The theory, it works quite well. We just get another spiritual energy to come in and do things. But you must remember that all of you listening to this particular podcast have spirit guides that you incarnated with. They came in with you. Their job is to watch you and to guide you and to take you through your physical life until your time of death. Now, those spirit guides won't be particularly skilled at this type of work. This type of work is specialist work. In the same way that if you look at a barrister, someone who spent years and years learning the legal system and law, you wouldn't expect somebody, let's say, that worked on a building site, that was a bricklayer, and a very good bricklayer too, to understand old legalese law. Because to understand old legalese law, you'd have to go through the teaching and training process of law. And of course, it's quite complex and there are different words and it's quite difficult to learn. Of course, most of you could do that if you put your mind to it, but it's a long process. So you can see that your guides don't have the skill set to be able to do this type of work. They can, and you can elect with your own core consciousness to invoke Archangel Michael, Raphael, some of the others, your own guides, and of course myself. But this is where we have specialist teams that we've spent years and years and years now building behind the scenes. Many of the energies that I work with have never been human. They are extraterrestrial entities that form part of our team. And certainly from a Spirit Release Academy perspective, everyone that works through the training program, their guides will get trained and they will get connected to our team behind the scenes. And it's the team behind the scenes that has this immense amount of power to be able to clear and remove these very low vibrating entities that have been on planet Earth for a long, long time. So hopefully that gives you more context as to why, for some people, a very quick clearing can fix all of the problems and that person feels over the moon and wonderful, which of course is great. But for some people, it's not the case. And then, of course, if we look at the aftercare aspect, because of course there always has to be aftercare. If you had an operation in a surgical theatre, when you get sent home with medication. You get sent home with pain medication to take. You get sent home with bandages and all sorts of other things to keep the wound clean, to stop viral bacteria building up inside a wound if you've had some sort of surgery. The same thing happens from our perspective. There is a wound to the etheric field and to the spirit effectively, and it takes time for that to clear and basically reform to the point that it offers proper spiritual protection, and all of the perforations that happen in the field have been cleared and removed. So of course there is a timeline effectively. So if people go back to doing the things that they did before, which is sometimes why they have the problems, then of course this is a recurring pattern. People then need to think about their own spiritual protection. So if it's raining outside and you walk outside without a coat on, you expect to get wet. The same thing with this type of work. Once you've had your etheric field taken apart, cleared, and the vibratory frequencies cleared and removed, that etheric field is in disharmony for a few days, as we say, probably up to 5 in reality. So in that first 5 days, it's quite important that you think about your protection, you invoke your guides, you do spiritually protective things, you stay away from the things that gave you problems, and of course, more importantly, probably the people that you associated with that also have problems. If you're mixing with a group of people that are doing drugs or other nefarious things, lots of different activities that we could consider to be negative, really, from a health perspective and emotional perspective, then of course you'll get sucked back in. And whilst your field is still slightly open and those perforations haven't really healed, other things can connect to you. And of course, this is the time that you're the most vulnerable from that perspective. So after a cleansing and a clearing, obviously we're quite keen to send people details as to how they can promote their own spiritual sovereignty and keeping themselves well protected and cleansed and cleared. And there are a number of ways that we can do this. We can use sea salt, we can use meditation, we can wear amulets, we can wear crystals, we can use sage in the house, we can smudge the house, we can use different types of geometric symbols, so sacred geometry, flower of life being one of the most protective symbols, which of course why Andrew has that in his logo, because we wanted to make sure that the logo is also protected. It's a vibratory frequency, so we've impregnated the flower of life into the actual significant logos that you see when you look at the logos that we've had made. And of course, they've always been part of the design of the amulets. So when we make pendants and pyramids and things to wear, that process came from the combination of myself connecting and speaking with young Andrew, doing the research to come up with the tools that required to keep negative energies at bay and keep them out of people's spaces, out of their bedrooms, out of their houses. So these pyramids work very well from that perspective, as do things you can put in your pockets and things that you can wear. So pendants, different types of amulets and crystals obviously embrace your field. They change your field. They make your vibration higher. They help you to hold a higher vibration. And we all know that different crystals vibrate at different frequencies. And there are a whole raft of different colours and choices that make things very interesting. But this is the key. It's about trying to keep your field at a high vibration. And the higher you vibrate, the less problems that you have from the negative side. And of course, generally, the more positive your life becomes, because you're vibrating at a higher frequency. The negative side can't really attach to you, can't control you. So there is no aspects that are negative from that perspective. And of course, your higher your frequency, the more collaboration you can have with spiritual entities such as myself and your own guides. As your vibration comes up, so your frequency comes up. As your frequency comes up, then the ability to use telepathy and talk and converse with spirit guides in the way that we are today becomes more possible. So all of you are able to do these things. Every human that walks this planet is able to use telepathy. You can all speak to your guides. You just need to be able to put some time in to learn the right methods and, of course, to do things in the right way. Like everything, there's always a right way and a wrong way. And trying to run before you can walk is generally the problem for most people in the spiritual arena, because, of course, it's so much fun. There's so much to see and do, and the topic bandwidth is huge. There's so many interesting things, but most people want to do them so fast that, of course, they then trip themselves over to a certain degree. So just thinking about taking your time, finding people that you trust, people that have got time and experience, people that have been there and done it, are able to pass on their skill sets. And this is why we're very keen. And young Andrew and Jane obviously run these protection training courses. And of course, that's come from myself. We want to teach people the right methods to protect themselves and to be able to work spiritually. I do believe that I think the timer is going. So that's probably an applicable place to stop. So without any further ado, as they say, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you found this short narration and conversation quite interesting. And again, I'm sure if you have questions, you can send them through to Young and Jane on email. And of course, we obviously have the Facebook channels whereby we are active. I actually do answer people on there through Young Andrew and Jane's fingers. So if you have questions direct for me, Chen, then place them on those groups and we will do our best to help you in any way we can. So thank you for listening, and I will bring Young Andrew back. Good day. Chen's on time. It's unusual. What was that? that? I must have been about 25 minutes or something. Okay, so I'm back in the house, folks, as you can see. So I just lean back, because apparently I slump all the time, so Jane tells me. Chen sits forward like the schoolboy that's doing everything right, and then I just slump back in the chair, because generally my back's aching, because he's been sat forward for the last half an hour. So things tend to work, really. So, Jane, I joined late. Curious to watch the replay. Yeah, the replays are good, Char. So thanks for joining. We appreciate that everyone's busy. It's obviously a working day, so different people doing different things. And of course, this is the beauty of this type of podcast, really, that it's recorded. You can then come to it when you can come to it. You can obviously review it when you need to review it. And we're also broadcasting this out through Chen's page on my Andrew Surgeon page, Facebook, and then, of course, on YouTube as well. So lots of people that don't use Facebook, which I can understand, because it can be slightly trying at times. So YouTube seems to be another place that people like to kind of find their content and listen to the things that we're doing and saying. So from my perspective, thanks for joining. I've got no idea what Chen said, but I will obviously listen to it a bit later. And I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. So I'll say bye for now. Cheers, folks.